Hey y'all, it's me, CheesyPaninie, and I'm back with another tree tutorial video. And in the previous video, we made an aspen tree, a pine tree, a willow tree, and a dragon's blood tree. And if you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and take a quick look over here. But if you have seen it or just want to check out the other trees you can make in Terraria, keep watching. The first tree we're gonna make is a Coralburst crabapple tree. No mods are needed for this one. I picked this tree in particular because aside from it being cute and pink and just overall fluffy looking, I also wanted to make a different tree shape from the trees in my first video. This one has a vase shape, which means it has a central trunk that grows upright with its branches spreading wide at the top. Now, Coralburst crabapple tree usually has this light grayish brown trunk, but for my version in Terraria, I'm going to go ahead and just use white paint for it. I used wooden fence for the trunk and some minecart tracks for the branches. Now, don't get too frustrated with the tracks because they're a little bit unpredictable when you place them. And while you can fix them sometimes with a hammer, it's not always possible. There's a lot of trial and error when working with minecart tracks, but just keep in mind these 3 things. Number 1, if you build using a mount and usually press the R key to use it, make sure that you do it while you're away from the minecart tracks, because it is the same key used to ride the tracks. Number 2, minecart tracks will bend when you place them from horizontal to diagonal. Number 3, some minecart tracks that have more than one track next to it can be hammered to change its appearance. You can also hammer the ends. Once you're happy with how your branches look, we can start placing the crabapple flowers. For this, we use cloud blocks and cloud walls painted pink. Follow the shape of the branches, but make the direction of the blocks curve upwards. Make sure to leave a few gaps in between, and don't forget to hammer some of the blocks to make them look a little more rounded. You may also remove some of the minecart tracks and place cloud blocks in between to make the growth of the blooms look a lot more random. And that's how I make a Coralburst crabapple tree. For our second tree, we have the persimmon tree. No mods are required for this tree too. This tree is a spreading or open-shaped tree, which means that the branches of the tree mostly spreads outward to the sides. I picked this tree because I really like the colors and too many people have used pumpkin blocks for apples, so I wanted to do something different. So we start off with a rich mahogany fence painted gray. We then add the branches, which are minecart tracks painted gray. Unlike the previous tree, this tree's branches are a little longer and spreads to the sides. Once you're happy with your branches, start placing living leaf walls painted deep lime behind them, but leave a few gaps in between. Next, place pumpkin blocks on the walls. Make sure that they're at least one gap apart from the other pumpkin blocks so that they won't merge together. Normally, persimmon trees have a lot of fruit on them, but you go ahead and decide how many fruits you want to place on your tree. Next, we place the leaves. For this, I use purple and green strange plants painted deep lime and place a few on top of the pumpkin blocks. Strange plants only really need 2 spaces above the block to be placeable, but the sprite itself occupies 3 spaces. Placed strange plants are always behind blocks, so you get some interesting placements like this, where it looks like the fruit is sitting on top of the leaves. For more leaves, I use mahogany leaf blocks painted deep lime and closed off some of the fruits and actuated the others to make it look like they're deep within the tree. I've also cut the middle parts of some of the branches and placed more leaves to add to the randomness. And there you have it, we have ourselves a persimmon tree. For our third tree, I wanted to do something a little bit different and a little bit challenging. Coconut trees are fountain-shaped trees with these huge feather-shaped leaves, and I simply can't take a few living leaf blocks and walls or take some plants and clump them together and call it a day like what I did with some of my trees. Since the leaves are large, I had to form them manually and take a few liberties in designing it since I can't copy it exactly like how it looks in real life. This is probably the most tedious one to make in this batch, and you'll see why in a bit. You also need to get the All the Walls mod for certain walls. First off, I take some frozen slime blocks painted brown and hammer them into thin lines. Next, I place obsidian back walls painted brown behind it and actuate the blocks. This will serve as our trunk. For the top part, I place some living leaf walls over here at the center. If you like the look of this part with this wall, go right ahead and retain it, but I will be replacing them later. This is the part of the tree where we will be placing the coconuts, so make sure to leave that area blank for now. For our giant leaves, we take some minecart tracks painted deep lime and form the main shape of the leaves. For this tutorial, I'll be making the leaves symmetrical, but you can make them irregular if you like. However, the advantage you get for making it symmetrical is you can use the cheat sheet mod, copy the blocks, flip it horizontally, and then paste it on the other side. However, you can't really do this with hammered blocks because it will only copy the hammered blocks as it is and not flip it like the rest of the blocks. So unfortunately, you're gonna have to hammer all of these manually. The blocks I used for the small leaves or fronds of the coconut tree leaves are blue dynasty shingles painted deep lime and hammered to form them. I only put them under the minecart tracks. It usually takes me 3 blocks to create the shape. The frond at the tip usually follows the direction of the minecart tracks, and I prefer to end the tracks downward. As for the fronds at the sides, depending on the location of the blocks, they would either end up like this or like this, and that's okay. If you really want it to be consistently just one look for the leaves, you end up sacrificing the close placements because you have to put in an extra gap in between the fronds, which I'm not very fond of, so I just let it be. Now that we have those blocks set up, it's time to add a little more detail to the leaves by placing green tiled walls behind these fronds. I chose these walls because they keep the deep line paint well and the diagonal lines kind of complement the shape of the tree. And I know that the diagonal lines really only go to one angle, but I think it works alright with the other side as well, even if it's not the same angle. The important part here is the shape. Though I know that the coconut trees don't really have square leaves, I liked how it looked anyway, so I just went with it. Not all the trees you make have to look absolutely realistic, even if it is based on a real tree. Sometimes it's nice to just try something unusual and have fun with it. It's a game after all. For the other side of the leaf, I use festive wallpaper painted deep lime. You don't have to put too much of it and just kind of make it peak that way, while the green tiled walls have to be longer than the blocks we placed and shaped. Now that our leaves are done, it's time to add the coconuts. For this, I use silly green and pink balloons painted brown. I chose these two because compared to the silly purple balloon, these two retain the shades of the paint better. It's also better to have 2 different blocks for it so that they don't merge together and also look a little less uniform. I put in some small and large ones to vary the sizes a bit and placed disc walls painted brown in the back. I actuated the coconuts here, but I realized that I really prefer them unactuated because it gives the tree more depth and makes it look less flat. I've also replaced the living leaf walls with green tiled walls, made the tree taller, and made some fixes here and there. And that's how I make a coconut tree. For the final tree, I'll be making a wisteria tree. Though actually, wisteria isn't really a tree, it's actually a species of flowering climbing vines. There isn't a specific kind of tree it will climb onto, so you can actually be free to do whatever kind of tree shape to pair it with. I actually planned to make this tree in the first video in place of the willow tree, but I was pretty stuck on how to make the flower, so I scrapped it. But then, when the video came out, a viewer suggested it, so I decided to give it another go. And I know money can't solve everything, but in this case it sure can because we'll be using coins. Make sure you also have the All the Walls mod for this one. First off, we take some crimson grass walls painted purple and place it in the sky, forming a loose shape for the top of the tree. You can't really place walls in mid-air, so you can either build a column of blocks from the ground and place walls behind it, or use an ice rod so you can place the walls immediately. Before we move on to making the shape of the wisteria blooms, it's important to know which coins and what type of paint to use. In order of lightest to darkest, it's gold and copper coins painted purple, followed by platinum and silver coins painted deep purple. To illustrate how the blooms are made more clearly, I'll be building them without paint for now. Placed coins take on the furniture layer, but they behave like sand that needs something under it to support it and will collapse if the block under it is removed. For support, I use living mahogany blocks. I chose this because the shape it makes is irregular, even when hammered, and the color blends well with the coins when painted. So first, we decide on how long the blooms are going to be and place the blocks at the ends of it. Next, we place the coins in order, the darkest one first, then the lightest ones at the top. So that's silver, then platinum, then copper, then gold. The top part of the coins kind of curve naturally if the edges of the sides are one space lower than the middle parts. After you're done with that, hammer the blocks inward, like so. Now do the rest of it the same way. I like to vary the size and positions of the blooms to make it look more natural. There are a few things to keep in mind when making the blooms the way that I do. Number 1, make sure the position of the blocks at the bottom are pointed, with the middle part lower than the sides to make that drooping shape. Number 2, make the blooms close to each other but avoid letting too many coins be too close so you can keep them all from merging into one. And number 3, having the cheat sheet mod makes moving around the blooms a lot easier, which helps me a lot in making them compact. Once you're happy with the shape, paint the gold and copper coins purple and the platinum, silver, and living mahogany blocks deep purple. Then just adjust the placement of the walls, leaving a few gaps here and there. For the trunk and branches of the tree, I've decided to use a mix of palladium columns and living wood painted brown. This is because palladium columns have a similar texture to living wood, and it is also thinner and lighter, which lets me make thinner branches and a tree that has more range of shading. Note that palladium columns can't merge with dirt blocks, so I put some living wood under it so that it can merge. I start off the tree trunk and branches by placing the palladium columns and creating the main shape. The problem with palladium columns is the edges tend to be too sharp. So what I do is replace those edges with living wood and also replace horizontally placed palladium columns because they tend to look pretty flat. So you basically just want to keep the palladium columns that are placed vertically. Hammer down the edges and you're done. You can also actuate this if you want the trees to have a darker shade of bark or just want it to be passable. We can actually consider this tree done as it is, but in case you want this tree to look a little more special or magical, get yourself some nebula fragments, paint them deep purple, and replace some of those living mahogany blocks with them to light it up during the night. You may also get some copper ores painted deep purple and replace the rest of the living mahogany blocks to give it that sparkle effect. And now we have a wisteria tree. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching this video. I had a ton of fun experimenting on tree builds, and I hope these tips I showed you would be helpful for some of your future builds. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, maybe leave a comment and tell me which tree is your favorite, share with your friends, and subscribe if you want to see more. I'm also trying to think of what other props or small mini builds I can make, so if you have suggestions, let me know down below. So for now, I'm just gonna go do my thing and you guys do your thing, and I'll see you guys later. Take it easy, stay cheesy.